Hello and welcome back to Warframe. Today, once we get to the classroom here, which is going to be in here, I think. Sure. Yes, so today, the classroom, we're going to be talking about enemy gathering. What the hell is enemy gathering? There are no enemies here to immediately show this, but it's when you put a bunch of enemies in one spot. Not like that. So, we've got an enemy over there, and we want him here. Obviously, this has myriad applications, AoE weapons, including the Satamos, which chains. You can do a good old heavy attack that way, or even everyone's new favorite slam attacks, and it's very helpful to a lot of different abilities. Now, there's going to be 4 categories of what I call enemy gathering abilities, and I'll just give a quick rundown of those. So broadly speaking, there are some overlaps, and we'll discuss those in time, but your abilities equal for enemy grouping are going to be described as a push, like such. There's also a pull version. There's a vortex, and vortexes, we're going to call it a vortex because I'm not going to put the word on the screen and risk getting demonetized for YouTube. That would be easier. Vortexes and pulls have a lot of overlap. Typically, I'm going to define a vortex as a duration-based effect that is omnidirectional instead of just pulling enemies towards you. And then the 4th category, which is a little rarer and kind of questionable, is going to be taunts. And we will be showing some examples of those shortly. Starting here with Banshee, which is a push type, as you've seen. Biggest problem with push types is if you really want to group all the enemies, you have to be aiming into a corner. Otherwise, they're going to just go over there because a lot of them are cone types. Anyways, once they're over there, you can see with this acid Sobek, for instance, that they're nicely grouped up for some AoE damage. Also, a technical push type, though the slowest in the fucking world, is doing this, the dive kick. A little used Warframe ability, which does not work on enemies who are already knocked down. And you could gradually put them together like this, if you were insane. It's worth noting, you'll get a little bit of that from some of the certain melee attacks also have a pushing effect on them, and you really have to dig into the wiki into the stances to see which ones those are. Next on our push category, and oh boy, I had to find the loadout to actually show this off, and it's not something you'll see a lot, is tectonics. You know, this. As you'll see, they are nicely all grouped together. Doesn't really work all that well if they're not in a straight line, but I think you can put range on it, it might. Anyways, Atlas does want to group up enemies for Petrify, but I'd vastly recommend putting a helmet on instead. Back in the realm of the barely effective, this is Ember's Fire Blast. As you can see, it actually does push them, but it pushes them directly away, so you'd have to really get them all on the line and do something like this, and yeah. Ember also doesn't really have a whole lot that benefits from grouping. And this is slightly more effective if they're grouped, but if they're all in front of you and you can see them, it's equally effective anyways. Oh yeah, before I forget this one. This one's kind of weird because sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of like the slide kick. I think you have to get a direct impact, and then it will group them up. And interestingly, turns off the pause AI function in the simulacrum. Anyways. And for Excalibur, yeah, this is allegedly supposed to push people back, and it might with regular Excalibur, which I don't have handy. It might be doing it a tiny bit, actually. Definitely wouldn't rely on it, though. Here on the not terribly reliable, but you'll eventually do it if you try hard enough, and then you can do that to them. Yeah, Grendel's Ball is very finicky to try and actually use like that. Ah, Hydroid, this used to be basically your video because you could do all three. Anyways, nowadays, after his rework, Hydroid can only do the push version. Though he did have his push is slightly buffed because it does force enemies into a single point, rather than expanding outwards in kind of a cone or a circle like a lot of the rest of them. Obviously, once Hydroid's got them gathered up, you typically want to do that to them. I don't have a viral augment equipped for some reason on this loadout, but yeah. I was really struggling with where to put Corvex in my categories here, and I settled on calling him a push, which is technically what he does. He doesn't do the pushing, he comes from the sides like this, and claps them together. Sort of iffy on the enemy gathering, but it is a setup for his laser. Which I somehow don't have enough energy to show off. But yeah. Really, you'd probably want to group them tighter than that with either a pull or a vortex. But if you just want to keep your Corvex pure, that's what you do. Yet again, I had to find a config I had not actually helmet this ability off on, but this is Rhino's push. It's lacking in precision, we'll say. Like, technically that'll work. Funny thing is, the augment for this is the one that you want things grouped up for. The Ironclad Charge, which makes the fact that the charge itself isn't a grouping tool sort of iffy. Or a very bad grouping tool. You basically end up helmeting another one onto him anyways. Another Warframe who will appear multiple times on this list. Starting off, no one remembers this as a push, but lo and behold, amidst all its other uses. This is also technically a combo of a push, and if you put it into the right thing, a vortex. 2 for the price of 1. Usually followed up by doing that, and then the ultimate energy allowing. Another kind of weird one, which I've elected to call a push. It's only here for completion's sake, because it will take them forever to get over to those other enemies. Titania does have something else we'll be talking about, though, later on. So yeah, back in the realm of things very few people would ever use. This is Defy. It does, in fact, push things. And I am on the wrong loadout. Super professional. Nope, that's also got it. Helmet. There we go. How do you do it? Yeah, that's a very poor push. He used to have a different one before his rework. Alright, and this one, Zephyr, which I've pushed the wrong button already. It's may depend on your settings. One's a push, the other's a pull. In my case, it's hold the push. Very careful where you aim it, because if you aim it in the middle, they'll just go flying everywhere, as you saw. Which is the opposite of what we usually are trying to do with a grouping tool. Alright, welcome to a change in scenery, because now I don't have to worry about them flying off the edge from pushes. Starting off with Vobin here. This is a pull. It's technically a vortex, but given its limited ability to grab things, I usually use it as a pull. Also notice it has occasional trouble with the targeting. But yeah, Typically, you would use this with Bobbin to potentially set up Spectre Rage in that case, or his third ability if you didn't helmet that off. Depends on your build. I thought it was actually on my other Bobbin build. We'll see that later, though. Alright, you're in for a rarely succeeding treat here, where I acknowledge that Valkyr still exists in the game in 2024. Valkyr actually gets 2 entries on our pull pile. Make whatever joke you like in the comments. Whee! You can also use the augment for 3, and yes, Valkyr does have a 3, to do this. It's honestly more useful than her actual 3. The 7 Goth video I mentioned, he does have his own grouping ability, but you'd probably helmet it away to add something more convenient. So if you fill up his death well, you can turn into the Shadow. The Shadow can now do this with its 1, then you can turn back and do his combo thing here. Or you could just, helmet over his Shadow and skip step 1, 2, 3. But it is there. You might argue this is technically a Vortex, but since it only does 1, pull effect, I'm calling it a pull. Go fight a bit in the comments. Anyways, Larva, usually used to set up this, to rapidly build stacks. Just because Necro's head already equipped, this is a Zaw. Zaws can equip the Arcane Exodia Hunt in their special Zaw Arcane slot. Exodia Hunt, you can get proc. Might have to be a heavy slam. Yeah, there it goes. That's Exodia Hunt. If you don't want to otherwise equip a grouping thing, you can just bring along a Zaw. It'll do it for you. Speaking of universal options, come on, do the thing. Do the thing. So the Nautilus Sentinel has this thing called Cordon you can equip on it. It is somehow not equipped there, so that explains that. Needless to say, this has a cooldown and it's completely as random, essentially, when it wants to do it. I do not recommend, unless you're really struggling to find any other option. Having things on a cooldown that you can't see and subject to the whims of AI are not a good idea, generally. Kind of a no-brainer here, Meg, and actually the Helmet 2 literally has an ability called Pull. Guess what it does? It actually used to be funny because it wouldn't stop them in front of you. They'd keep going past you. That said, it's a very good setup for Meg to do this. Among other things with various other Warframes. Alright, this might be a tough one to actually show. I also could have technically included Caliban's summons in the push category, but I refer to the previous comments about summons, about that sort of stuff. But yeah, when Caliban does his 4, there are 2 blazers that do a lot of blast damage. There's an AoE field that persists that drains armor. There is also a tiny little gathering thing. As you can see them all get yanked together. It's not high range at all, as you can see. That one didn't even move them. The pull is very short, and it's not the main utility of that ability by any means. Now, for what is generally considered the most powerful of these gathering effects is vortexes. The big thing with vortexes is while they do persist and continue to drag in enemies, they generally have a little shorter range than direct pulls or direct pushes. So for Gauss's Vortex, which is the Mock Crash augment for his 1, he wants to run into a wall. And anyone who wanders near while that thing's spinning will get yanked into the wall. with all the hilarity that ensues. Coming in next on our Vortex group is Gyre's Coil Horizon, which you can also put into the helmet if you feed Gyre to the wall. Has the interesting effect of only being slightly lower range than Pull while being a Vortex, and actually doing a strangely high amount of damage, particularly if you've armor stripped. And you can kind of detonate wherever the hell you want, because you control the detonation. You don't have to put it directly in front of you. And you can even actually bounce it around corners and some stuff that's fun, because of it being a physics object. It has limited use for Gyre, unless you're running a melee build with her for. But it's actually quite helpful. It's what I use on Caliban for my helmet. Another one was on the fence with his cores and snare, and I decided to call it a Vortex because it is a multi-part thing. But yeah, biggest disadvantage of this one is it's very flat, like you can't really yank them across the air. And you do have to actually get one enemy as the target, which a lot of other gathering things, you do not have to anchor people to an enemy. One thing is, it does shut them down from a crowd controls perspective for a lot longer than almost any other gathering option. Here's our Cindy boy. He got changed from a weird kind of a push in his old version, so now he has a Vortex. Cause sure. Anyways, enemies will come hurl at you. They will kind of spin around you, but they do tend to all go into one spot when you drop them. Neat thing about him is he can actually take them for a ride. Whereas most Vortexes do tend to stay in the same place. Particularly if you have a Zaw like this, where I've got the Exodia Hunt, you can basically have an arrows just carrying a bag of enemies around until they actually just die. And not to leave out our operator. Good old Void Snare. That's a slightly persistent Vortex, but it is terribly not long range. You can see here. Yeah, we didn't even entirely get those. This is another one where you generally have to bolt it to a wall or a floor too, which can somewhat limit your options in terms of Vortexes. The Bazarin operator doesn't have a whole lot useful to do with his dashes through them or anything like that, so there's a very niche build where you gather them up and you do a thing called Magus Accelerant rather than our Magus Tethers there. Then you use a heat amp to kill them. I would only use that if you're really struggling with some kind of operator versus enemies content that I'm not sure actually exists in the game. Right, so it's your boy Vobenbach. He literally is the one who named it Vortex. And here it is. I don't know how the hell they just survived that. When enemies are doing this stuff, like ragdolling, they quite often have a tendency to not actually exist in the game's eyes. I commented on it with the Acid Shells video too, is stuff just won't apply to them. So, one of the hidden problems of crowd control in Warframe. Another one I forgot actually when we did the push category is if you augment Bobbins forward the repelling Bastille, every so often it will push enemies out towards the edges. I don't really run that because I haven't found a super practical use for it. It's very niche at best. But yeah, so if you were using it by an edge like this, it would push them all out to the edge. That time it got them all. Alright, everyone's favorite skater girl. Yeah, Riptide. Riptide just kind of follows up on itself. Also leaves them right in nice locations so you can trap them with those. I believe the actual order you're supposed to do it is those and then the Riptide. And some kind of combination there does a whole lot of damage. Anyways. Last but certainly not least of the Vortex group. We hold to make them stationary. If you just tap, they'll wander around or they'll follow your aiming cursor. Funniest thing with Siffer's tornadoes is any enemy who is affected by our tornadoes, regardless of whether they're floating, so regards to, eats shit. Including acid shells, so that's fun. Complicated group number 4, which is taunts. There are a bunch of different taunts in the game. For simplicity's sake, I'm only covering the ones that allow you to gather. The general thing with most taunts is they will not gather the enemies to you. They will just make them turn and shoot you because they have guns. There are a couple of actual exceptions to that, though. One is Loki. Double check the helmet thing on this because I might have done the thing. Yeah. Okay. I've turned on my invincibility for the sake of testing purposes here. So we put a low-key thing here. If we disarm the people, then they will be forced to go melee the decoy. That said, you can still see them kinda not doing it because we're relying on the AI shenanigans. Can always get a little weird. Also, I still have my Exodia thing equipped. It's like the decoy seems to only have the ability to attract so many people. But yeah, that will set them up nicely, and then you can do something like this. Now for Taunty Gathering number 2, if you find some way to disarm them, you can do that with Siren's Molt's one of the main other ones as well. Or Wisp flying thing, they'll chase after that. Titania, who is actually only going to need one ability at the cost of just having to have an enemy to target. Titania can just go boop. Then they'll just go all hang out there. That thing also burns them. And you can do this to detonate at any time. Also, you can get an augment boost your damage for every enemy that's attracted to that thing. So yeah. Titania does Loki's whole gimmick in one ability, which is the biggest of problems with Loki. Or a problem with Titania. Put it however you want. Anyways, hopefully that covers a guide on enemy gathering, some of its general uses. Of all those abilities, the best ones you can generally helmet on are going to be Pull or Coil Horizon. You can put on Korra's Ensnare, but it requires an enemy and it's kind of slow and it doesn't give any additional bonuses to people that aren't Korra. With the main benefit being that it has that little extra bit of crowd control if the enemies are susceptible to it. Coil Horizon's also very good at that with the electric proc. So Larva, you can helmet on, but it has the most annoying line of sight checks of any of them. And it's also a physical projectile that you launch out and usually has to hit a wall. Almost every other ability of the type, you can just set it off in your desired location without having to worry about that stuff. And if you found this helpful, remember to like and subscribe. Let me know if you want more actual general guide videos. Usually I do specific Warframes, and in one case at least so far a specific weapon, and try and shoot for more like interesting things than outright generic guides that are a dime a dozen already. And I will catch you all in the next one.